So Ukraine has put together a number of search and destroy units who are methodically hunting down and eliminating Russian soldiers who thought they'd broken through. Now, Maxim Tucker in The Times put together an article a few days ago titled "The Battle for Kupyansk: Inside Ukraine's Victory Against the Odds." And in this, he lays out this new tactic, this new type of formation that Ukraine is utilizing to pretty good effect in a couple different areas of the battlefield. In this, he quotes Colonel Sergei Sidorin, the commander of the Kupyansk Search and Destroy Task Force that he says was created in secret this past September. The colonel says his forces did not have the numbers to overpower the Russians. Instead, they decided to adapt and improve on the infiltration tactics employed by the enemy. So, infiltration tactics, this is something that we've seen utilized by the Russian military over the course of at least the last year, pretty successfully in a lot of areas of the front. So what we generally see with a military offensive is a lot of firepower, a lot of manpower moving forward in a consolidated manner. Combined arms warfare, right? Airstrikes and artillery followed by maneuver elements, tanks, armored personnel carriers, or maybe even dismounted infantry. That has become a suicide mission in this war. And we've got video after video after video showing what these large armored assaults look like as they try to traverse the 20 to 40 kilometer kill zone that is covered with mines, overwatched by Ukrainian artillery, and constantly scanned by Ukrainian drones. I mean, Russia still tries that from time to time, but the results are pretty expected. What we have seen in place of this is Russia has started pushing small groups of dismounted infantry forward. A lot of times they'll move forward maybe to a degree in an armored personnel carrier. We've seen the use of pickup trucks, motorcycles, ATVs, even horses at times, though I think the horses were more a little behind the lines, not necessarily used in assault. Either way, trying to get these Russian soldiers within, say, 10 kilometers of the zero line, the front line of contact. And from there, they are guided by their drones overhead to move forward and try to infiltrate through the Ukrainian lines, which isn't all that hard in terms of finding a gap. I mean, it's hard to find a gap that's not overwatched by drones or not seen in some way, shape, or form. Not all that hard to find a gap where Ukrainian soldiers are not physically present. They just have not been doing that along the front for a long time, and they've opted to rely on more reconnaissance from these drones. There are blind spots. There are seams between units that can and have been exploited. I think the best example of this over the course of the last year was just northeast of Pokrovsk, where Russian soldiers during the course of a month or two broke through a pretty good distance, 19, 20 plus kilometers in the Dobropillia direction. And what Russia is doing is they send small groups forward, 2, 3, 4, 5 at a time. Those soldiers move as far forward as they can, try to take cover, usually in the basement of a destroyed building, and then follow-on Russian forces are sent. Over time, that one individual soldier, if the others don't get killed, turns to 2, 5, 6, maybe even more. And before long, you've got a sizable Russian element, maybe platoon, even company-sized, now technically behind the Ukrainian lines and can inflict a lot of damage, a lot of pain on the logistic lines, on drone positions that previously were well protected and now find themselves forward of Russian positions. This Russian infiltration tactic, in talking with some foreign volunteers with the Azov International Battalion a few months ago, they referred to it as very effective if you don't care about losing personnel. Because we don't know the numbers exactly here, but the recent videos suggest that a large number of individual Russian infantry moving across frozen terrain, open fields, trying to find a bunker to hide out in sub-zero temperatures is probably not great for their life expectancy. And no doubt a lot of them are killed along the way. But when 1, 2, 3 get through, it does cause a bit of a disruption. So in terms of what Ukraine did to turn this around and use it against the Russians, use their own tactic against them, they say the assault force was divided into small squads of around 8 infantrymen each, moving in different directions to confuse the Russians. Quoting the colonel again, he said, "We decided to conduct assault actions simultaneously in all directions, not openly, but covertly, and where we achieved success, we developed it." He said the groups moved constantly forward, without getting into large, serious battles. If we detected the enemy, we mostly tried to destroy them with drones, while the infantry moved on and cut the enemy's logistical routes. That is, very succinctly put, the Russian infiltration tactics. Right, so they're sending small groups forward. In this case, they're saying roughly 8, which is a decent-sized squad in the Ukrainian military, but specifically trained for this mission set. And that's a key component we're going to get into here in a second. But they are not just moving forward, try to find contact and pin the enemy down and then clear that building. They are specifically trying to locate Russian soldiers. When they're located, send that information up so they can be hit with drones or artillery and move on. Try to disrupt those lines of communication, those logistics that allow those Russian soldiers to stay in the city and stay supplied. They talked with a guy named Callsign Zanuda, 37-year-old. They say he commands an assault company of the 13th Hartia Brigade, who we know played a major role in the clearance of Kupyansk. He said his men had trained for storming specific buildings and were well supported by drones and artillery. Quote, the guys didn't go in cold. Every building was photographed from all angles. We knew where the windows were, we knew where the basements were, we knew where the doors were. They found the plans of these buildings as much as possible so that we would understand what the layout is inside of the building itself. This is starting to come across a little bit like special operations. And again, very similar to when we talked to some special operations guys in Azov a few months ago, how they go about their clearance operations as well. So, what we saw even a couple years ago, if you think about some counterattacks in, say, Bakhmut or Avdiivka, or to a degree even in areas south of Pokrovsk, it wasn't nearly this well coordinated and this well planned out. It takes a lot of resources to do this. It's a lot easier to have a squad, platoon, or company of infantry and say, move forward, take that building, secure that block, take over that industrial building that we've lost to the Russians. It's very easy to do that, very easy or very quick to put that into motion. It comes at a cost, though, right? Especially in some of these areas where the Russians have had days, weeks, even months to dig in. And what we saw down in Dobropillia was digging tunnels between the basements of different structures. So that's what these infantry are moving into. You can understand then some of the counterattacks, again, moving back to Bakhmut, how deadly a counterattack could be in a situation like that. In this case, again, very similar to what we would expect, very resource intensive. A lot of drones overhead, deliberate intelligence of building by building by building. So when they move in, they're not just trying to advance to contact, they are going building 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and on. They know exactly what they are getting into. Now, this is, again, very similar to the conversations we had with Azov, which is a special operations unit, in a couple different conversations. I'll link that in the description below, actually. Really incredible insight into how these are being carried out. And it shows that this type of re-infiltration tactic, if you will, search and destroy type tactics, are being utilized to great effect, not just in Kupyansk right now, but in the Pokrovsk sector, Dobropillia, over the course of the last few months. Now, I did get a question on the Unclassified podcast that I do with Ben Wheeler each week. We just answered it a couple days ago, where somebody said, do I expect a large-scale Ukrainian offensive in 2026? And my answer is no. It doesn't make sense for Ukraine to do that. It's not likely based off of the cost that they would achieve any sort of desirable result. I mean, what are you really expecting? Let's be honest at this point, right? Have you seen how stagnant the front is? Are we going to see like 6 brigades mass up undetected and break through and reclaim all of Luhansk or Donetsk? Like, it's not realistic on either side of the line right now. What we are likely to see in 2026 on the ground is what's playing out right now in Kupyansk, what's continuing to play out in Dobropillia. So these relatively small-scale counterattacks, very well coordinated, very well organized, intensive or asset and resource heavy. So what this will look like are deliberate clearances of certain small areas with a goal of taking advantage of Russian mistakes. So it's less about taking back a lot of territory. And even when it comes to Kupyansk, we haven't heard a lot of the square kilometers of territory retaken. It's more about stabilizing the lines and kind of reinforcing this kill zone that has been created across the Eastern Front. So I would expect in other areas where you start to see small Russian breakthroughs, that we see this search and destroy type tactic, whether it's, these Hartia type brigades, these search and destroy brigades up in the Northeast, whether it's Azov a little further in the South, or other elements that are being built kind of in their exact same fashion to be utilized in this manner. From what we're seeing in these couple different areas, it looks pretty effective in terms of the cost ratio, in terms of manpower and equipment, the losses and the embarrassment being inflicted upon the Russian military. Now, in sticking with that story around Kupyansk and kind of the embarrassing aspect here, Rybar, once again, we've got this weird situation in Kupyansk where it's a relatively small city in eastern Ukraine, and Russia for a while has been hammering that they hold the entire city. And instead of like walking that back, which clearly we have the footage of Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Kupyansk, they went a step further last week and said, not only do we have all of Kupyansk, we actually have a town a little further south. In fact, let me pull up a map here to show you the area we're talking about. And what we're going to do for today is not just use Deep State map, but how about Suryak map, which tends to align pretty closely with the Russian Ministry of Defense. So this is Kupyansk here in the middle of the screen. This is the area that Russia and Putin has said that they have full control of and have for months now. Clearly they don't. They just made that up. I think there's some interesting things to read into that. You know, is it that the chain of command just does not want to correct Putin? That nobody wants to take responsibility for all of the false reports they've sent up claiming territorial control when it isn't there, or one Russian soldier is in an apartment block, so you call that entire city block is now under Russian control when, you know, the guy gets hit by a drone 2 hours later? There's that, or there's the question of, does Putin and the higher command in the Russian military just have a vastly incorrect understanding of the situation at the front? I don't know. If you know, let me know. Either way, this last week, we strangely saw the Russian Ministry of Defense claim that they have all of Kupyansk Vuzlovi right here. Really struggled with that one. So a good distance south of Kupyansk. And again, what we're looking at right now is kind of the pro-Russian version of mapping services, right? So I don't know the background of the person that puts these together, but this map tends to align pretty closely with what the Russian Ministry of Defense says. But there are still times where they're like, I don't know, there's no evidence to support that, so what are we even doing here? The Russian mill bloggers and the Russian media landscape continues to get frustrated with this. Rybar said, quote, in the Kupyansk direction, consequences of false reports about liberating Kupyansk Uzlovi are emerging. The enemy published footage disproving the presence of Russian armed forces in the settlement. Let's go ahead and play that video here real quick. Deep State map says the village is under the full control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. A good confirmation of this in recent days are the daily videos of Ukrainian service members walking without body armor and helmet, but also without a hat in the center of the village. And notably in the video, there's no distant sound of gunfire or artillery or drones buzzing overhead, which, yes, we know there's fighting north and east of this, but there's pretty clearly not fighting in the city itself. They say, indeed, sometimes small groups of the enemy penetrate the village with the aims of infiltrating Kupyansk Vuzlovi. I don't know, I'm struggling so much with that, from the Pishnani area via the railway. So looking back on the map here, from this eastern direction, they say sometimes there's these infiltration groups that try to get in. Deep State says, quote, but they are cleared out, and this is done, unfortunately, relatively often, but it is done to prevent further accumulation. And again, with the frustration that the Russians are feeling here, Two Majors asks the question, who exactly are we trying to trick with all of this? He pushed back on some people saying, well, this is just a psyop, a psychological operation designed to deceive people and keep them off guard. And he says, I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians know where they are. So kind of raising the idea that, are we trying to trick ourselves? Are we trying to trick the Russian population? Are we trying to trick Western governments maybe that are involved currently in some of these negotiations? I think any one of those is viable, but it's not tricking the Ukrainians who are in the village saying, what are those Russian reports even talking about? And we've said it before, it's actually net beneficial to Ukraine for Russia to make up some of these progress reports. Because what we see then is additional Russian forces have to be pushed forward to try to take that territory that they've reported up weeks or even months ago was secure. And you have reports from the Russian side of units saying, we can't get air support, we can't get drone support, we can't get artillery support, because our units are saying, we're not going to fire on that building that's been under our control for 3 weeks. But it hasn't. And it's full of Ukrainian soldiers. And now these infantrymen are having to move forward without any serious support. So, I mean, I guess if Russia wants to keep up with the made-up reports, go for it. Hurts them, helps Ukraine in a lot of ways. Now, continuing on with some battlefield updates here, I'm going to go over to Deep State map. We're still seeing some of these relatively, not large, but armored assaults. Again, 1, 2, 3 vehicles at a time. And we talked about it previously. It's not been useful for quite a while, but we just saw one earlier today pop up just to the west, or this was yesterday, coming from the Ukrainian 7th Rapid Response Corps. So we've got Pokrovsk down here in the middle of the screen. Hershny to the northwest is an area that right away you see this pocket. Russia tried to make a move towards this direction. It's kind of the last staging ground, if you will, before you get into Pokrovsk. I think that's probably a bit overstated at this point. This is all under Russian drone coverage at this point. Nonetheless, still a direction that Russia is pushing. The 7th Rapid Response Corps said, quote, enemy activity is increasing in the area of responsibility of the 7th Assault Corps. Northwest of Pokrovsk, Russian forces attempted a mechanized assault on Hershny, deploying 3 armored vehicles in an effort to speed up their advance after infiltration. Tactics failed. Russian troops were destroyed both on the approaches to the village and on its outskirts. 2 enemy armored vehicles were destroyed. More than 10 Russian soldiers eliminated. 1 enemy vehicle fled the battlefield. Ukrainian forces are continuing search and clearance operations, including inside the village itself. Again, this is the type of thing we should expect to see playing out into 2026. So the kill zone that Ukraine has developed throughout eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass specifically, we'll pull this map back up here. The Russian losses, equipment and personnel, are just staggering for very, very, very limited gains. I mean, we had a video a couple days ago talking about how the advances near Pokrovsk are slower than the Somme in World War I. Are you kidding me? So Ukraine, with their defense minister a few days ago saying their goal for 2026 is 50,000 killed Russians every month, they're not going on the offensive. They're not going to be charging Bradleys, Abrams, and Leopard tanks through Russian lines trying to retake Zaporizhia. You don't do that. You don't get to 50,000 killed Russians a month by going on the offensive and trying to retake portions around Chasiv Yar. You do it by digging in and reinforcing some of these defensive lines that the Russians are running up against day in and day out and losing shocking numbers of soldiers in the process. So what we're seeing with these search and destroy tactics, all the way to the continued drone wall the Ukraine has built across the front, the refinement of that is what we should expect in 2026. Now, we're not seeing a lot of movement on the front right now. Notably, it used to be 50 to 100 engagements around the Pokrovsk direction daily. It's fallen quite a bit given the cold weather, and Russian mill blogger Two Majors talked about this, saying, quote, General Frost on the front makes adjustments to the intensity of combat actions. Thus, the situation on the front is characterized by the preparation of the Russian armed forces for another offensive action against the backdrop of an operational pause on the work of the infantry and severe frosts. The parties have reduced the number of long-range drones launched daily behind each other's lines, which, among other things, indicates their accumulation for further strikes. So generally, as we would expect in cold winter months, it's not just a winter is slower, but we've got sub-zero temperatures, and it's going to get colder this week across Ukraine. You should expect a slowdown in the operational tempo, and it does seem like that's what we're seeing. Hey, quick fundraiser update. We kicked this one off, like 5 days ago. This is wild. We're at $36,000 last I checked of a $35,000 goal. So you all are incredible. This is always so cool to see people come together. Not just, you can go down to the comments, right? And there's people saying nasty things left, right, and center. That's free. Anybody can do that. Not anybody will open their wallet and contribute to try to help people that are in need. You all are incredible. It is so humbling every time we do this. But we exceeded the goal. So what these are going towards right now, and I can confirm the purchasing for this is happening on the back end in Ukraine today. Like I saw some messages back and forth. Vehicles, power generation, and fuel. So fuel for those generators to keep the soldiers warm. We're working specifically with the Gur Legion, not the International Legion. Gur Legion, very much still active, very much still in the fight. And then some medics of the third Army Corps, and then some medics in the 47th Mechanized Brigade. Hopefully, given that this happened so fast and the purchasing is happening right now, I hope to have some updates with some pictures and videos, kind of the evidence of those deliveries here in the next couple days. But from the bottom of my heart, you guys are awesome. This is always so cool to see. Now, stepping back a little bit, there was an interesting discussion around Starlink here in the last couple days where it seems like the topic arose, and right away, Elon Musk, Starlink, they seem to have resolved it and effectively shut off Russia's ability to use Starlink in their one-way attack drones. Now, this stemmed from a picture and some videos we went over a couple days ago where a Russian BM-35 drone was used to strike a target in the Pavlograd direction, about 50 kilometers behind the front lines. And in the wreckage, there was, clear as day, a Starlink. Now, this triggered a lot of conversation, but it was interesting because we know that Russia has been using Starlink on their one-way attack drones for quite a while. Like, we've seen them on their Shahids as well for real-time control in some of these areas. So it's, whatever reason, this one definitely got a lot of people's attention. It's a new defense minister. Maybe that's what it was. And we've seen action already. So Fedorov, the Ukrainian defense minister, said, quote, Ukraine, together with Starlink, has already taken the first steps that yielded quick results in the fight against Russian drones. The next step is to implement a system that will allow only authorized terminals to operate on Ukrainian territory. In the coming days, we will publish instructions for Ukrainian users on how to register Starlink for verification. Unverified terminals will be disconnected. Thank you, Starlink and SpaceX, for your cooperation and proactive stance in supporting Ukrainians. There's a lot here. That's a very diplomatic statement and understandable that he has to say that. But both Russia and Ukraine right now, I would argue, are overly dependent on Starlink. What we're seeing play out right now is this private U.S. company very quickly was able to make a change that directly impacts the battlefield. That should terrify any country around the world. Like, we're going to get into what the actual impact is going to be, and it's not massive for the change that was made, but the idea that, you know, a tweet on the internet gets a bunch of traction and then a company shuts off a nation's ability to conduct offensive or defensive operations is serious. And I hope we're paying attention to this. So Rybar, Russian media, I think, did a decent job of kind of laying out exactly what the impacts were here. They say reports from the front line indicate signal blocking for drones accelerating to more than 90 kilometers per hour. They say terminals stop transmitting internet signals after 2 minutes of flight at such a speed, but become operational again after reboot. So maybe it's not resolved, but what that does, then not most Starlink terminals are stationary, both in Ukraine and Russia. So the vast majority are being used for communications between stationary units. All right, so we have to keep that in mind. So 90 kilometers an hour, there's very few that are going to be on equipment going 90 kilometers an hour and above. So that seems to be a way to specifically target these one-way attack drones that Russia is using. The Russian commentary here, and I should note that across channels, they're all complaining about this. It sounds like there might be a workaround of just rebooting the terminal. We'll see if that actually plays out. Rybar says the most strongly affected UAVs are Lightning or the BM-35, again, the drone that was used just a couple days ago. They say the enemy has also been affected by this problem. Volunteers from Ukraine are already massively complaining about restrictions. And this is, I don't know how easy it is to like push a button and make this one change. My gut says that when you start to make any sort of change, it has the possibility of bleeding out. Right? If you go from open access to 99% open access, the chance that something gets caught in there that you didn't mean increases, right? Because you're restricting it in some way, shape, or form. I have not seen a lot of pushback from Ukraine quite yet. And I'm not sure we've seen evidence of Ukraine using Starlink in their one-way attack drones either. I believe we've seen it on some of the unmanned surface vessels out in the Black Sea, I believe. But in terms of, I'm not sure those are hitting 90 kilometers an hour. So as of now, the impact to Ukrainians' drone efforts, I would say, are probably pretty minimal. They say it's worth remembering that the number of stations the troops has long since extended tens of thousands, and compiling their complete list may take a considerable amount of time, not to mention the technical difficulties and associated security risks. In case of a system hacking, such a list would gift Russian troops the geolocation of many Ukrainian positions. So it looks like the next step here that Ukraine is trying to pursue is this whitelisting. Hey, here are the terminals that are okay. If it's not one of these terminals, it cannot operate inside Ukrainian territory. I get that, like the whiteboard concept, that makes sense. I don't technically know how Starlink would be able to make that work and if they can make that work. But Russia brings up a good point here where they're saying, if we've got a list of every Starlink terminal being used in Ukraine and that gets leaked, again, I want you to think just about how much is being placed in the hands of a private company. Should be concerning. They say the restrictions have affected the Russian armed forces' capabilities much less. Domestic drone operators have largely relied on alternative relay means since the beginning of the war. The Garan or Shahed-style drones have long been equipped with mesh transmitters and are independent of Starlink. However, in the Russian armed forces, it is used not only for drone control, but also for communication between units. This area has not yet been affected by restrictions, but in the future, unilateral shutdowns could seriously impact the command system at the front line. That would be the biggest impact for Ukraine. If Starlink went out today, it's the communication between units that would be most impacted, most dire. Russia is using them as well. And again, while that piece hasn't been hit, it does look like this restriction right now is only really affecting, in large part, the one-way attack drones coming from Russia. But again, the bigger story here, and we're seeing this across Russian media right now, is they're saying, hold up, we keep talking about not being overly reliant on technology from an American company in this sense. We need to make an alternative. We need to make our own domestic option. And they do have, to a degree, it's nowhere near as effective or as robust as Starlink, but this is only kind of expediting those conversations and moving those along even faster, trying to get more people to shift to a Russian alternative for U.S. products. And the U.S. military is not as reliant on commercial products per se as Russia and Ukraine are right now. Again, if this Starlink aspect was pulled out today, the war changes dramatically overnight. There's not anything like that with the U.S. military, but we have seen a pretty significant shift towards more and more commercial solutions in recent years because the innovation is there. The cost savings are there. So it's something we have to keep back of mind. Again, essentially an individual, one person, able to make a decision overnight that drastically affects tens, hundreds of thousands of lives on the battlefield in real time. I feel like we're probably looking past that. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.